And now we'll jump right ahead. It gives me very great pleasure to introduce someone that I've been working with for quite a while now. We love to poke each other. Sometimes we poke each other pretty hard. Sometimes we vent to each other when we're really upset about things. My respect for this lady is absolutely enormous. Pat Knight not only is a designated examiner, that's all she's listed as, but I know folks, she was with the agency for a while, and there were folks in her class, and I don't know, she'll be embarrassed I say this, but there are folks in her class who work with her who said she had the right stuff to go all the way to the top. She might have been speaking to us in place of Randy Babbitt, but she decided to leave the agency, and she's just a wonderful lady. Pat Knight is the moderator of our standards panel.
Thanks, Doug. Yeah, just the topic we want to talk about after lunch, standards, right? Standards, standards, and more standards. You know, while written test standards and practical test standards are really the focus of our standards panel, I just want to remind you that there are other standards that we should be concerned with. When someone takes the practical test from me or any examiner, that test is not really, that person is not really tested to 100%. They don't get everything right. Hence the human in this evaluation process. Same way with the written test, they don't get everything right. Yes, the questions that they missed are standardized and corrected before they come for the practical test, but can you really say that that applicant has 100% of that knowledge represented on that test? So we're losing some of the standard here. We're dropping down each stage. But also, we have the flight instructor standards, the flight instructor that trained that applicant that's coming to me. What are the standards that that instructor is imposing? Is he or she training to 70%, 100%, 80%? I don't know. A lot of cases, as we've already visited, that flight instructor is training the applicant to the test. So I think you begin to see the problem where we're dropping down in the quality and the meeting the standards each time we miss that. I recently did a check ride with a CFII applicant, and this was an initial flight instructor certificate, and the applicant told me when I asked him to give me a scenario about instrument proficiency check, he said, well, I'll go to the regulation. I said, okay. I'm just a student, and I want to know on the instrument proficiency check what we're going to do. Is going to be an hour flight? How much ground? What are we going to cover? Oh, I'm going to the regulation. I said, okay, show me. So he goes to the regulation, and the regulation says it's topics selected by the instructor. And he kept hammering on that. And this was already into the test where he'd already missed one thing with me. And now here he missed a fundamental that the instrument proficiency check is defined in the PTS. He's a double I applicant, and he missed that. He doesn't know that. Now, is that his problem, or is that the problem of the instructor that prepared him? Or did he miss that and wasn't tested, or didn't meet the standards way back on the instrument rating test? So we begin to see the problems with the standards because we have to be sure that we're testing the right thing and we're testing accurately, and the tests are administered properly to be sure that we're meeting those standards. I had one other applicant that showed up for a initial CFI with me, and he had a 172 RG. So retractable gear, he's required to bring that, and I usually try to give them a first problem that they can get. It's kind of get off to a good start. Alan's going, yeah, right? And many other DPEs are going, yeah, right? So I said, I had trouble, I'm playing a role now, I had trouble on my check ride doing a weight and balance. You need to retrain me so I can go take my check ride, because I failed on that topic. And he says, okay, and he whips out this manual and he starts training me, and he did all the numbers incorrectly, and I'm looking at the book and it's a Model 172 SP, POH. And I said, what are you doing? He says, oh, I didn't want to buy the other manual. Well, if you know the 172, I think it was a 172 SP, it has a normal and utility category portion in there. And he was telling me that the 172 RG was in the utility category. I go, no. Did he fail? Yeah. But look how far that goes back. Where was the standard that he should have been tested on or caught on weight and balance? That's student private. But he got to his CFI and couldn't do it. And couldn't do it right. So standards. It's the great thing to talk about after lunch. But we're going to hear from 3 different people. I want to introduce Eric Crump from Gleim Publications, and he'll start our presentations.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to see you all here. It's a veritable who's who of aviation, which I love because this is essentially like hanging out in the hangar back home, except we're in a nice hotel and someone fed us. We didn't have to pay for it, theoretically, and that's wonderful. And I was actually telling a few people, Dr. Gleim was regrettably unable to make it to this symposium. It was something that he's very passionate about, but he was unable to make it because he's in Alaska at the Alaska Air Show. And when he asked me if I would come and speak on behalf of the company, I said I would love to. You know, where's the schedule? And the reason I actually took the job is because I'm the first speaker after lunch. And it is my hope that since I have one of the most controversial topics in general aviation right now, that most of you are still in your lunch slumber. If you are not, I will give you a few minutes to get to sleep, and then I will start talking. And then afterward, I'll wake you up so that Tom can talk to you about something else. If you do stay awake, please do not throw anything at me. So obviously, we're talking about the FA knowledge test. And I think the first point that I really want to get home, and I hope that you agree with this, is that there really should be a knowledge test. I get feedback from flight instructors and students all day, every day, saying we should just abolish the knowledge test. It's useless. And I really disagree with that position. I think the knowledge test, the principles of the knowledge test are extremely valuable when implemented the right way. And these are just some of the reasons. Of course, this is my opinion. When you hear some of this, a lot of this is company policy and a lot of it is Eric policy. I've been asking Dr. Gleim to replace the Gleim with Crump for 4 years now, and he just won't do it. I keep telling him it's a really attractive name. It would look great on this red book, but he won't do it. So some of this is my opinion, and I welcome you to disagree with me. I hope that tomorrow we can really stir up some good discussion about these topics. But when we're talking about theoretical knowledge and practical knowledge, having the ability to test both of those independently is very useful. Additionally, testing, I don't know if any of you remember high school. I still vaguely remember it, but you know, when the teacher said there was going to be a test, that was good motivation to make you go study something. So there is a motivational tool there, and also, when done correctly, it can also be a very effective memory tool as well. And ideally, the knowledge test should be an aid for both the student and the flight instructor to prepare for the oral exam portion of the practical test, if it's implemented correctly, ideally anyway. There are a few ideas going on as in terms of modernizing the knowledge test at the FA level. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's some of the current big pushes that are going on. And really one of the major things is this idea of preventing question and answer memorization. Some of you may be aware that a few months ago there were some minor changes made to a couple of exams. Not anything substantial really. Doubling the failure rates and things like that. And nothing big. My phone didn't ring at all. So it's, you know, it's understandable, and a lot of the effort there is to prevent this number one item, because we in the training industry, speaking, you know, putting myself in the fire, so to speak, we have a product that lends itself to memorization. Like your car can be used as an instrument of death if you use it the wrong way, or it can get you from point A to point B, like it was designed to do. The GLIME knowledge test products are designed to transfer knowledge. They should give you some idea of the concepts that are being tested. They're not meant to be verbatim memorized and then regurgitated on a knowledge test, but unfortunately, if you use them incorrectly, it is possible to do that. Many of you in this room may have in fact done that in the past. I won't ask anybody to raise their hands or anything. I actually had a lengthy conversation with an FOI applicant who I was going over with him. He made a 38 or something on the FOI exam, and I was trying to find out from him what his study mentality was, and he said, well, I bought your book and I read your book, and you know, I learned the concepts, and I went and took the test, and I bombed it. I said, okay, what did you do then? He said, well, and I called the FAA, and I spent an hour on hold, and then I finally got to talk to somebody in Oklahoma City, and I won't say who he talked to. And same person said, what did you do? And he said, well, I took this GLIME book, and I memorized all the questions and the answers. I went and took the knowledge test, and you know, the questions were completely different. What are you trying to do? You're trying to confuse me. And the inspector, bless his soul, knowing him, I can see the look on his face when he said this, said, well, actually, that's a form of cheating. So if you would just go ahead and give me your pilot certificate number, and click. And that was the end of that. That was the end of that phone call. But I mean, point taken, right? And we really should be focusing on decision-making level knowledge, not just how do I find VS on an airspeed indicator, or you know, what are the entry requirements of Class B airspace? Is that important? Sure it is, but there are other things that we want to be testing as well. And then also moving towards a mentality of selecting a best answer. I don't know how many of you people spend a lot of time in the cockpit. I don't get to spend as much as I used to, but there is very rarely in the cockpit a single correct answer for whatever you face. In many cases, in fact, there are several plausible alternatives, and you have to pick the best one. So to some extent, the FAA wants to move the knowledge test to a point where we can test for multiple valid answer choices. That makes sense. And then also encourage higher levels of learning, not just straight memorization. So I don't mean to point fingers. When I get to my opportunities for improvement list, I will admit that the FAA list is a little bit longer than the other two, and that's not a jab. That's not a jab at all. It's not a jab at all. But they are the ones who regulate. They are the ones who implement these tests, and I hope that through this short talk today, and also what we talk about tomorrow, that we can provide some good recommendations on how to make this process better. Everyone I've met and have knowledge of, worked with through the FAA, has always been helpful to me in any capacity that I worked, as far as trying to figure out not just what's going on, but why. Why are we doing it this way? And that's part of what we're trying to do here, is trying to do it better. I'm going to go through this list quickly just because this is a quick talk, so hopefully we can get into this more tomorrow. We need to move past rote memorization questions in the test databases. There are too many examples where only rote memorization of facts is required to be able to complete the test. And you know, this is the whole if you test it, we'll train it mentality. If the FAA only requires me as a student to know the material at a rote level, where is the encouragement to me, or the necessity for me, to learn it beyond that level? And that's part of the problem that we face. Additionally, the calculation questions on the exams, most of you are familiar with, they're extremely close. And a lot of the answer choices run so close together, and we're talking about using a marker and trying to use a graph to come to an answer, and it's kind of hard to determine which one is right or which one is wrong. Additionally, we want to cover more relevant, pertinent subjects. You know, there's still a lot of testing on ADF navigation. It's been a long time since I shot an NDB approach. Actually, not since my instrument check ride, as a matter of fact. That being said, we should be covering more topics like GPS, glass cockpits, and we've talked about that a little bit already. I mean, I'm not going to read all of these to you. You've probably already read them ahead of me. But really the number, I guess whatever, the last one from the bottom there, working with industry to develop better test databases. That's what we're here to do, and that's definitely the direction we want to move. And we also want to use pre-testing more, releasing those questions out as pre-test questions before they get released into the actual databases, so that students actually can help the FA determine the validity of their own questions without having to find out through trial and error. I told you it was a shorter list. For instructors, it would be great if flight instructors would develop the desire to teach ground school again. From my experience in this recent FOI debacle, I have instructors fussing at me because their students failed and the student blames them, and I say, well, how much time did you spend reviewing the concepts with them? Well, none. I told them to buy the book, memorize the test, and go take, and whatever, you know, I'll teach you how to fly when we get in the airplane, or how to teach when we get in the airplane. It would be great if we were developing a culture where we were teaching ground school again. And then also, implementing written testing in your instruction. That's not done a lot. We evaluate people on how they maintain PTS standards, but we're not doing a lot of written testing as part of the instructional process. And then students, you know, really take the time to learn the concepts, not just, if I see these words in the question stem, it's B, because that's not going to help you. Number one, now it's not going to help you on the knowledge test. You're not going to do well on the test, but it's certainly not helping you long-term as a pilot either. And ask questions. You're not solely responsible for your own training. It's what your flight instructor should be there for. And there's a multitude of resources available to these students, and hopefully we're telling them that. You know, come to me, ask me questions, let's sit down, let's discuss these concepts. And that goes to make the testing experience much more valid. That should be it. Yes, that's me. You can write it down or we can talk about it tomorrow. Thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate it.
And they didn't throw anything, Eric. Next, we'll hear from Tom Norton, Norton Aviation. He's a designated pilot examiner in the Eclipse 500 and works for the Orlando FSDO as a DPE. He's going to address us on emphasizing the practical in FAA practical tests.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, thank you very much to SAFE for this opportunity to speak. I just didn't know it was going to be after lunch, but with that, I've got a joke coming, so hopefully we'll keep everybody awake. When I was asked to speak about putting the practical back in the practical test, you know, I got some more information about what this was all about, as far as what are we trying to do, why are we here. It's kind of the thing I always like to address. And when I was told that, you know, this is a training reform symposium that is going to try to basically two things: increase the number of pilots out there, and two, improve safety. And I thought about those two ideas, and I said that's kind of like trying to fill up the seats and top off the tanks to come up with an airplane that you can do that. They're diametrically opposed. If you talk to the safety side of the house, they say, we're not going to train any pilot to fly at all. If you talk to the training side of the house, they'll say, well, it takes a year to get a private pilot. So it's quite a challenge indeed that we all are taking on, and I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that it's going to take a long road and a lot of hard work, I think, of collaborative effort to do that. But with that, I think anytime you're talking about training reform, you're going to have to first talk about safety. And safety is, well, back to my joke, actually. Back up. So the way I look at it is it's the psychiatrist versus bartenders, you know, the practicality versus the academic. And it's this guy walks into a psychiatrist's office and says, Doc, I've been, ever since I've been a kid, I've been always afraid of someone that is under my bed and I can't sleep at night. He goes, is there anything you can do for me? He goes, yeah. He goes, I can fix that. He goes, it's probably going to take about a year of 3 times a month visits, or 3 times a week visits. And he goes, well, how much do you charge? And he said, well, I charge $80 a visit. And he goes, but we'll have you solved and you'll be able to sleep. So the guy says, okay, well, let me sleep on it. I'll go home. So, and that wasn't actually the punchline, so he meets the guy 6 months later, meets the psychiatrist on the street 6 months later, and the psychiatrist is curious, why didn't you ever come back? And he goes, well, I actually got fixed from a bartender for $10. And the doc says, well, what did he do? He goes, he just cut the legs off of my bed and said, nobody's ever going to be under there. So I like us all to become bartenders rather than psychiatrists. Okay, so again, training reform, I think always is going to have to be safety first, obviously, because I think we all agree that accidents are caused by pilots. And I also agree with what the safety group had brought up, which was risk management is probably one of the keys to improving that safety record. And I'd like to congratulate the FAA, Bob and Tom Glista, on coming up with FITS. I think that was a huge step in the right direction to acknowledge that, hey, you know what? We need to acknowledge the fact that we've got cockpit resource management issues, single pilot resource management issues. We've got risk management issues that we need to deal with in the training world. But then I'll relate my personal story of when we came up with the Eclipse training program with Bob's help and Tom Glista's help. We did really incorporate FITS into the program. We knew our customer was going to be the general aviation pilot, stepping usually into a jet for the first time, so there was a lot of challenges in that realm. So FITS seemed to fit into that demographic, but within a very short time, 4 to 6 months, FITS ran head-on into the PTS. And that's where everything started kind of falling apart. The PTS basically was designed at that time for the maneuvers, and we tried to match up the training with what you were going to test towards. It just didn't work. So basically, what it came down to was, in essence, is that the PTS drove the training program, and I think there's a lot of people out here that will agree with that statement, is that the PTS drives the training. And I know that the FAA is there. Van said it so well, was that the FAA and the PTS is just going to set the standards and then set the way that they're going to surveil those standards. But in essence, when you set those standards, you're actually setting what you're going to dictate the training program is going to do. If you've got steep turns in the PTS, guess what? We're going to train steep turns. If you take them out, we're not going to train steep turns. It's just that simple. So I'm really looking forward to some of the breakout groups tomorrow, because I'd like to, you guys are the experts in the room, I'd like to really get some great ideas and some discussion going about how we can change the PTS, and I hope Van is going to be part of that. But just a few ideas is the biggest, I think one of the biggest things to start reform when it comes to the PTS and when it comes to training is that I think we all have to acknowledge the fact that the PTS does set the training. And we can argue back and forth, and I'd love to engage in those arguments. But once we first acknowledge that the PTS is a driver to the training, then we can start changing and reforming the training by changing the PTS, or at least maybe the way how we administer it. Just a couple of my ideas that just thrown around is, obviously the simplest way is what we're doing already, is what the FAA is doing already, which is we are slowly but surely changing the PTSs one by one to incorporate some of those softer skills of automation management, risk management, all those things. The way that was done was put it in the introduction. I'm not sure if that was the best way to do that, but it's slowly getting into the instrument. It's probably the most reformed PTS, and it's a step in the right direction. But I'd also like to encourage thinking outside the box. In other words, does the administration of the PTS, does it need to be in a one-day check ride? You know, can it be a progressive training? I had the opportunity, it's a rare opportunity as a DPE, to be the instructor and the DPE for a customer of mine. And what a wonderful experience that was, by doing basically a progressive training checking event, where you took the student, you taught him how to fly and all of the procedures, the risk management, everything that was going on. And at the end of it, yes, there was a check ride, but at the end of it, the check ride was a non-event, because we've already done all of this stuff. And the pilot sitting across from the instructor / examiner There was no nerves, there was nothing, because as a DP, and those of you who are there know what I'm talking about, it's very frustrating as the examiner, as the designated FAA representative, to sit there and look at a pilot just fall apart from pure nerves because of a check ride. And you're never going to see that pilot. You're going to see a nervous guy that's just a bundle of negative energy because of this one day he's got to pass a check ride from the last 2 weeks, 2 months, 3 months of his instruction. So maybe looking at a different way to administer it might be an answer. And we can also learn lessons from the Part 141 schools. You know, they do the stage checks, the progressive training, where there's just a graduation, not a check ride. And lastly, we've had very good success with in the Eclipse world, where we had it mandatory for a mentoring program. An idea of maybe formalizing mentoring throughout the industry in both private, commercial, instrument. What a wonderful success rate we've had with it, because there is no check ride. It's real world training. It's going A to B. It's very relaxed. It's just the pilot is in an environment to learn. He's not under any pressure to do anything as far as maneuvers or a check ride environment. What a wonderful way to teach somebody when they're relaxed and they're open to learn. So again, I look forward to some more group discussions and some good heavy debates on how we go forward from here. And thank you. And let's all be bartenders.
Thanks, Tom. Last will be Dr. Kurt Barnhart, President of the University Aviation Association. He's also the Aviation Department Head at Kansas State at Salina. He'll be talking about modifying the standards to meet professional pilot training needs.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here and talk on behalf of University Aviation Association, and it's good to be back in the South, the land of sweet tea. I grew up in the South, and it is indeed good to be back. I knew I was in the South the other day. Last time I was here, I was in my car and driving a little bit too fast, and saw the lights behind me and pulled over, and I had forgotten my wallet. And so as the officer's walking up, I thought I'd preempt him a little bit, and I stuck my head out the window and I said, "Officer, I got no ID." And he said, "About what?" No, just kidding. This is truly a good conversation to have. My hat's off to SAFE for putting this together. We should have been having this a long time ago. So great job for getting this together. It's really needed. All right, just a little bit. I've been at this a little while, not as long as some, longer than others. But as Pat said, my other job is Aviation Department Head at Kansas State University, and we have several aircraft, Skyhawks, a lot of Skyhawks, and some Bonanzas and Barons and King Air, sailplanes, motor gliders, and helicopters. So if it flies, we've got it, just about. There's a few things we don't have on there, but we're working on them. So. The University Aviation Association, if you're not familiar with it, and many of you in this room will be and already are, we're composed of over 500 institutional, corporate, professional, and student members, and approximately 100 college or collegiate aviation departments are represented in that number. And what I did in leading up to this, I wanted to give the college faculty, collegiate aviation faculty, a chance to sound off about this topic. So I laid it out. I told them the topic of the seminar, the symposium, and I said, here's my topic. Let me know what you think. And I left it fairly broad, and I got a lot of response. Basically, I said, is it broken? And if it is, how? And let's hear about it. So here are just a few things that I wanted to touch on based on their feedback. So basically you're hearing from what they had to say. And these are all items that appeared multiple times. Got a great response for this informal survey, and a lot of these themes kept coming up and kept coming up. So obviously, and some of these have already been touched on. I won't dwell on them, and others will be coming up in another panel, but too much focus on unrelated tasks, both knowledge and practical tests. And obviously FITS is helping in that direction, but we have been, our students have been fairly slow to get on the FITS bandwagon for a lot of different reasons. Number one, over half of our fleet is still analog, composed of analog aircraft. We call them steam gauges, and so when they get done with that FITS program, there's some additional training they have to go back and do in order to fly the rest of the aircraft. So that's been kind of a bump in the road on our side. So we haven't had a lot of that yet, but we don't have a FITS PTS yet. We don't have an integrated check ride, and that's probably the biggest thing my faculty from Kansas State wanted me to convey. Too much focus on rote memorization. We talked about that. And this next one is a little bit difficult to address from a standards perspective, but students are often placed in an aircraft prior to conceptual understanding of the mechanics behind flight training. That's somewhat hard to address through standards, but I thought that was a really relevant comment and should go back to the way we address curriculum. Current standards, this came up a few times. Current standards require too little of applicants, or they're capriciously assessed. There's just a lot of variation in the practical tests and how they're given, and sometimes an examiner will only discover a problem if they happen to ask that particular question. And there I'm sure have been many cases where egregious knowledge gaps have gotten through the system. Some of the other problems. Students report, and I had one young lady in particular who emailed me, and she said, I just wanted to sound off about this. She says, I took a private pilot ground school class at my college, and I wasn't an aviation major. It was just kind of a filler class for me, so I really wasn't invested in the class. She said, but she passed the airman knowledge exam for the private pilot, and she admitted to me, she said, I have absolutely no conceptual understanding of the content of the course. She just said, basically, I went through and memorized what I had to and passed the test, and just I completely didn't correlate anything in the class. So she obviously had some attention issues there, but it is possible to do that. So that's a problem. Recent FAA changes, and we talked about the FOI a little bit, have actually made things worse. Not necessarily being able to memorize test questions and answers, but many of my faculty report there's an increase in the need to actually memorize certain answers, because unless you know specifically what the FAA is looking for, and you've read specifically in that paragraph, and you know that word that will fit in that blank, you're going to get that question wrong. And it's that's not an isolated incident. So that was something that kept coming up. Current standards do not focus enough on judgment and decision making, which is the foundation of aviation safety. And this was a really a common theme throughout all the responses. We're not tying those two together. We kind of leave that hanging, and so that's something we've got to focus on fixing. All right. This is another area, and some of this will step on, I think, the next panel, so I don't want to go into too much depth here, but I wanted to mention it because so many people brought this to my attention. They said there's no significant Part 61 CFI quality control. That was absolutely by far the most frequent response. Renewal of CFIs is virtually automatic. I mean, you sit through that 2 days or that 16 hours and you're renewed. There's no focus on assessment or you know, where was the retention and all that. Some seminars do address that, but there needs to be more of an assessment. No requirement to periodically demonstrate practical skill proficiency. For instance, in a 121 carrier, when you're doing proficiency checks, we don't require that of Part 61 instructors. No oral test standardization. Certain maneuvers should always be demonstrated, whether it's slow flight or stalls, or and it's been a while since I've been in the right seat, but there are certain things that are slipping through the system that shouldn't be allowed to slip through. Somebody said that we're, and this is true, but it's again a little bit difficult from a standards perspective, we're too afraid to let students fail. We're in that mindset, in that culture where everybody has to succeed, and we're bending over backwards to make sure that they succeed, sometimes at the expense of content knowledge demonstration. Again, too little CFI accountability. There's not much CFI, especially under Part 61, not much CFI accountability. So, a few recommendations based on some of the feedback, and some of these are some of the things that we are working on at Kansas State. Require a portion of the CFI test to be conducted on a simulator, so maneuvers could be paused, easily repeated. They could be discussed in depth. You know, why is your power setting at this level for this phase of the maneuver? You could even print off the results for a record of that test. More periodic pilot and CFI, require periodic pilot and CFI oral and practical tests for Part 61 and 91 operators every 2 years, standardization or compliance. So again, you know, re-examining that issue, you know, retesting. Out of 90-day currency, that's one of my ideas. Maybe it should be that we have to fly with a CFI rather than just going out and doing 3 landings. You know, that not all of these are going to be popular. I'll touch on that in my next slide, but maybe that's something we have to look at. And lastly, one of the things that we're doing in academia is moving towards an e-portfolio of knowledge, demonstrating knowledge in the form of electronic recordings of video presentations, articles, reports that are written. Perhaps that could be integrated into the CFI application process so that an examiner ahead of time could look and see an applicant teach a lesson and then focus in on some key areas, and then when they get to the actual test, you know, really check that out and observe that in depth. So again, just some thoughts. The flip side of that would be, I mean, if we implemented all this stuff tomorrow, I already have trouble keeping CFIs. I mean, they're and keeping super instructors is even more difficult. So what is that going to do to the already beleaguered CFI ranks? And then maybe we should look at what incentives to counteract that: pay, status, privileges. There's a lot of different things we could talk about, but again, don't want to get into some of the other panel discussion areas. So anyway, thank you. You've been great, and I appreciate again the opportunity.
Thank you for your attention, and thanks to the panelists. I'm over here making notes because there's some other things that I want to use in our breakout session tomorrow, so I've gotten even some more ideas from them. So thank you very much.